Well, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning.
Let's see some faces. Turn your cameras on. Share your beauty with the rest of us.
Good morning.
There.
Morning.
Now we're seeing.
Something worked.
Awesome.
Stop.
So that I have everything kind of.
Well, hello. We can take off.
Wonderful. Elissa, you are now a co-host, so you should be able to start letting people in.
I am letting people in. Good morning, everybody. I will let them in as they ring the doorbell.
Awesome. Awesome. Lots of ringing going on. Lots of ringing going on. I'm going to.
Anderson. Yeah. Different than mine. A little bit.
Let's make sure that everybody can everybody hear me all right? Or does it sound echoey, or does it sound terrible? Or am I right kind of in your face sitting?
It is fine.
Awesome. Well, hello, Cheryl.
Unmute me. Oh, sorry. Good morning. Not muted.
It looks like you're in the NORAD control center there.
We are. I'm trying to get this to zoom in right. Kristen doesn't want to be on, and neither do I. So we'll be signing off cameras soon.
Nice. Awesome. Awesome. Hello, Sam. Nice to see you.
Well, good morning. Good morning.
It's actually good to see everybody. Is anybody getting any kind of an echo when someone talks, or does it sound okay?
Not me.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Excellent.
Sounds
Excellent.
good
Good morning,
here.
Sandra.
Well,
Playing from
curiosity,
WS 2019.
All right. We'll give people just a minute or two more before they hop in to join us. I hope everybody's doing well. We're going to be, in the next email, we're going to put out a few more webinar dates so that everybody is aware. These have become enormously popular, which we're pleased. And we're recording them as well. We have had an overwhelming number of people come back to us and ask us if we would be willing to do another Teams session, because a lot of people found it to be extraordinary. So I'm going to look at the dates, the upcoming dates, and I think we're going to do a redo on that. I shouldn't say a redo. We're going to do another one of those sessions and put the word out to everybody if you want to bring people back in, especially for those of you who have got large people working in your organizations. If some people got to go to the first one but couldn't come to couldn't go, then they'll be able to go to this one, and we'll record that one as well. So it's just been amazing, the number of folks who have reached out and said, please do that one again. We loved it. And a close second place was the Outlook web one. A lot of people have sent me really funny emails, especially over the last week of, oh my God, I had no idea it could do all these different things. I took the challenge, and it's been, can y'all hear that? I mean, there are some people right outside that are cutting, so I hope it's not too annoying. A lot of people who are just like, I can't believe that Outlook can actually do all these things on the website. So it's been great that people have discovered that. I've had a lot of people also tell me they're not going back, which is cool. It's super cool. So really, really glad. All right. Looks like we've got a couple more folks who are joining us. And all right, so let's get into it here. Everybody ready? If the noise outside that is being made is overwhelming, just start waving madly to me and tell me please stop, because I can't stop them, but I can stop myself, right? Any housekeeping stuff, Alyssa, that we need to share with the group?
So good morning, everybody. We're so glad you could be with us for our webinar this morning. So we're going to leave you all on mute, as are you guys all already are. Clearly, if you have any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself. If you don't want to jump in because Rick is moving right along, you're welcome to message me privately and I'll make sure your questions get asked. He'll also have a question and answer session at the end. So if it's something that can wait and you want to ask it yourself, that's just fine as well. But if you think you're going to forget, jump right in the middle or send something directly to me. And really, that's it. We're glad you're here.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, so let me share my screen. Everybody has been asking me what the theme is going to be for this week. So now you know. Is that coming through to everybody? You can nod if you can see my screen. Great. Wonderful. I was thinking about what I thought would be an appropriate theme, and this one kind of came to mind. So here we go. Let's talk a little bit about SharePoint and what SharePoint is, because a lot of people seem to be exceedingly confused about how it works, what it does, how to talk to customers about it, also how to talk to your own people internally about how to use it, right? So I'm going to spend some time this morning kind of giving you the high level of what it is, how it works, kind of associating you with some of the terminology. The format of this is going to be just a little bit different than the last few that we've done because SharePoint is a beast. There are a lot of things that it can do. There are a lot of different ways that it can be configured. I'm going to tell you on the front end of it that this is not my way or the highway, so to speak. But I will give you enough information so that when you start to look at this and think about how SharePoint can either look in your own environment for the environment of your customers, it'll be sensible where you can start to say, all right, now I understand kind of how to stack the cans on the shelf. It'll make much more sense than it does now. Everybody should, if you're familiar with it, how many people are familiar with this movie? Ferris Bueller's Day Off. How many people have never heard of this movie? Ricky, the rest of the people are going to start to flog you miserably. You know, as you can tell from their reactions, you're missing out on one of life's most wonderful events. So
You could just be very young, Rick.
listen, you know what? It's a classic, timeless movie. There you go.
My
Ricky,
kids
write
quote
this
it.
down. Definitely watch it numerous times. It's a lot of fun. It never gets old. SharePoint has got a couple of different things that it can do with the way that it's kind of stacked up. To give you a little bit of background, SharePoint got off to a little bit of a rocky start many years ago. The way that it used to be was that you downloaded what at that point was a SharePoint for workgroups. It was, relatively speaking, it was pretty easy to set up, but it required a lot of dedicated resources inside of your network to run. It required a dedicated server for it to sit on. It had to have access to the outside world. And people started to really be faced with the reality that, you know, my gosh, this looks like a really cool kind of system, but it takes so much to get it set up. And once it was set up, it took somebody with a rocket science degree really to administer it on an ongoing basis. And as any of you that are in the IT side will know, Frank certainly knows this from his own, and I do as well, it would break. All of a sudden, the database that would store information would just go sideways, and you would have to be faced with rebuilding SharePoint, and it was a bear. When it worked, it was wonderful. When it didn't work, it just was an absolute horrible experience. As time went by, Microsoft continued to invest time and energy into making it better. They also required more resources to run it. At its high point, you needed to have 2 or 3 dedicated servers to actually run SharePoint. And it never really kind of delivered on its promise of what it was supposed to do, right? Which was give you this kind of new way of storing documents, kind of a pseudo file server, a knowledge base, all these different things that allegedly could do. And a lot of people just gave up on it, right? They just said, you know what? I'm not going to use it any longer. It's too complicated. All the customers that we have are never going to spend the money in order to run this, right? It's basically what they said. When 365 came around, SharePoint was one of the very first things that Microsoft targeted to be used in this particular environment. They felt like they knew what the complexity of it were, and they felt like it was a great product, which it is. How can they make it so that it becomes more inviting, easier for people to use, easier for people to roll out? Well, what are the things we can take away from it? Well, let's take away the servers. Let's take away the virtual machines. Let's take away the ridiculous amount of configuration it takes, the creation of 10 different accounts in Active Directory. Let's take all that away from the customers, and let's just set the environment up for them so that they can immediately start to walk through it. Wouldn't that be a novel idea where they can just walk in, the table's already set, and they can just sit down and start eating, right? And that's exactly what they did. And it was pretty complicated to do in the beginning, especially when you consider that this is what the Microsoft 365 ecosystem looks like, right? Take a look at all these programs. If you haven't gone out, and I have a link inside of the folder that you'll get that shows this, this periodic table that shows all the Microsoft 365 products. Those of you who work with 365 on an ongoing basis with customers, I'm going to recommend that you download a copy of this that I have for you, print it out, or make it part of your electronic documents that you give to your customers. And I'll share with you why. A lot of people who pay for these subscriptions with Microsoft really don't understand just how many products are really there, right? They think of Word, they think of Excel, they think of Outlook, PowerPoint, and everything. How many of you knew that there were this many products in Office 365? Raise your hand. Right. How many of you have ever seen it put out this way before in a periodic table? It's kind of cool, isn't it? You could spend an hour just looking at this thing and trying to understand exactly what's going on. So it's a really, really nice tool to be able to, number one, understand yourself, what's out there. But number two, as you're talking to customers about the greatness that is Office 365, now Microsoft 365, you can really go to the customers and there's a value proposition here. Yeah, you're spending $12, $25 a month for the services, and people are like, well, wait a minute, I can go buy the software, right? And then own it, and I don't have to pay a subscription. Yes, you can, but you don't get all of this. This is not available to be purchased. This is Microsoft's effort to continue to bring value to this particular program. This is what it looks like from the 10,000-foot view. I've got this waiting for you in the folder. So you can take a screenshot if you want, but don't worry about it because I've already got a nice copy for you. So the SharePoint side of this, well, it sits right here, right? Kind of tucked away, all right here. So let's talk about what it is, right? So it's a file server. It's a knowledge base. It's a version control system. It's a collaborative tool. And one of the things that we think is one of the coolest things about it is the last item, which is a customer outreach piece. What do I mean by this? Well, the logical use for SharePoint is a place where you can park documents, spreadsheets, presentations, hyperlinks, all that other stuff for you to use internally, like an intranet, right? Here are all your HR forms. Here are your policies, your procedures, all the things that you would normally use, right? You can use it as a file server. File server is kind of cool because you can put documents. And when you put documents and put them inside there, they automatically get indexed. You can search for them quickly. You can do that through a web interface. All right, well, that's cool because all of us have gone through that time-honored tradition of going out to your file server, typing in something for the search, walking and having lunch, and coming back and the search is still running, right? To find that one document that you were looking for. It doesn't happen that way in SharePoint. It's instant because it's indexing everything all the time. As a knowledge base, it's great for companies like ours. We gather all this information from all these different sources all the times of all the things that we do. And we can park those as PDFs inside of our own knowledge base so that we don't have to search on the internet all the time. They can be right there. Policies, procedures, the way that we go about doing things in daily life inside of Decision Digital, those all land in there as well. They're not on our file server, and they're not over here, and they're not over there. They're not in this folder and that folder, all these different disparate places. It gives us a way to kind of organize things in a very, very different way and get to them quickly, which I love. And because everything is automatically tagged with keywords, it makes it very easy to find. Unlike a file server where you have to sail through folder after folder after folder in order to find the things that you're looking for. And let's be honest, The way that, say, Sam sets up his file folder structure that appeals to him may not be the way that, say, Greg wants it to be, right? Sam thinks, okay, well, in Sam's mind, this file lives in this folder, in this tree over here, and it makes perfect sense to Sam, but Greg may not know that. Greg may be thinking of it an entirely different, and he's just fumbling around trying to find it. I know this never happens in any other company except for our company, right? Never. So this is where SharePoint starts to solve the problem. Version control, I love. You put a document out there for your team, they start looking at it, they start making changes to it, but before they make the first change, SharePoint automatically takes a snapshot of it and keeps that previous version. So if you want, if I start working on something, say with Cheryl, if she and I are in the same group, I make a series of changes to the document. Cheryl says, wait a minute, Rick's a bonehead. He didn't turn on the review system, and so I can't see all the changes he made. How am I going to know? This never happens, just so you know. Cheryl can immediately go back to the library and see, okay, here's version 1.4. It was taken right before Rick started. I can put them side by side and look at them and immediately know what the differences are, or I can use Word to actually do the comparison. So you don't have to be in the practice of making a backup copy of your files before you work on them. SharePoint will just automatically keep versions intact for you automatically, which is kind of nice. So that's what version control is. Team collaboration, that's pretty obvious. Multiple people can be in the same document working at the same time, which I love. That can be internal people, Alyssa and myself, Frank and myself, or it can be a combination of internal and external people. It could be Frank and Sandra working on something collaboratively, which is also very, very cool. And when you open these documents up, which I really, really like, is that it gives you the choice. Do you want to open them up in the browser and collectively work on them where you can see the changes being made in real time? Do you want to open them up in the native application that's on your machine? You have the choice. The online versions are remarkably strong. You'd be surprised how well they work. But the fact is that when you're both in it at the same time, it puts a little icon to show you that two of you are in there simultaneously working on it, which I love because I know exactly what's going on. And finally, there's the customer outreach part of this. If there's any lesson that you'll get from what we talk about here today, you're going to learn very quickly about the fact that you really should develop your SharePoint strategy with a split personality. Personality number one is the internal facing side of SharePoint that keeps all of your information, your files, your folders, your presentations and such. And then you've got an external facing section of that in our case, what we do is we have a site set up for each one of our individual customers. And that becomes the place where we start to park information for our customers. For example, statements of work, projects, documentation, things that we're working on collaboratively. Most of you are in that habit of just sending that information out as an email attachment, right? Let's play this little game. You send the statement of work or the spreadsheet to your customer. They look at it, they say, no, that's too much money, or I don't like these conditions. They make changes, they email that copy back. And before you know it, there's 5 or 6 versions of this email that are going back and forth, and you've lost track of which version is the real version you're supposed to be working off of. Or worse, you're making changes to the wrong version, right? None of us want that to happen. I'm giving you a different way to do this. If you set up a client-facing site, you park your documents in there, you invite your customers to come in there and review them from there, edit them there, you're always on the same sheet of music, right? You're working off the same ones. And guess what else you get away from? You get away from sending all those email attachments all the time, over and over and over again, which somebody, look, this happens all the time with customers. We have customers that are on this call. You have your own customers that you work with. Customers inherently will take the least expensive statement of work and say, aha, that's the one that I want to do, when it's not complete. So when I talk about customer outreach, that's what I'm talking about, split personality. I'm going to show you a little bit about this in just a minute. All right, lingo. This is where a lot of people get confused. Tell me about all these terms that you're throwing around, Rick Harbour, when it comes to SharePoint. Really, really easy. A home site, kind of the way that a website works. It's the place where you land, the very beginning of your SharePoint experience. That's what a home site is. In our case, I can just kind of drag this over to the window. Can everybody see the SharePoint site on their screen? Nope, not coming up. Let's see, maybe it's because, let me just share this in a slightly different way. Let me share the entire screen. See what that does. All right, now, can you see the SharePoint site now? Okay, this is our home site, right? And you can see that there's just very basic information is on here, right? Links that go directly to what are called our team sites, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, right? This is where people in Decision Digital, this is where they land when they come in, right? Pretty easy to understand. Okay, so home site. In a minute, I'm going to tell you about what communication sites and team sites are. There are basically two different types of sites that you can create inside of SharePoint. One is a communication site, one is a team site. They are different in what they do. I'm going to explain them to you in just a minute in a little bit more detail. Just know for the moment that there are two different types of sites that you can create. All right, a document library. A document library is a place, a repository of information that you create inside of SharePoint for storing, I know, wait for it, documents, right? A document library can be compared most directly to what your typical file server looks like now. I'll show you what I mean by that. A document library looks like, let's go here. This is a document library. Look familiar? This looks just like your file server, doesn't it? These are folders, and inside of the folders are files. In the SharePoint world, a file folder structure like this is called a document library, is what it's called. Somebody is scratching something and is unmuted. I hope, keep scratching. That's what a document library is. Lists.
Everybody, Rick, but it'll mute you for a second. So I'll do that, but then you need to unmute yourself, okay?
I'm sure that nobody's going to complain about muting me. All right, so lists. Inside of SharePoint, you can build list libraries. List libraries, the best way to think of a list is to think of, basically think of a spreadsheet that you've got a list of all the phone extensions for everybody in your office, right? You have their name, you have their extension number, and a list. SharePoint's got a built-in capability of allowing you to build lists of things so that you can organize them, right? So, you know, on our end, if you were to look at lists, a list that we would have would be extensions. Look, this is a SharePoint list. And you can customize these lists. Like, you can create a list. You can tell it that you want to create a new list. And then SharePoint says, wonderful. What columns do you want to have? And you can tell SharePoint what columns you want. And once you create the columns, it will say, what are those columns supposed to contain? Are they supposed to contain words, numbers? Do you want them formatted in a certain way? Do you want them organized and ordered in a certain way? Kind of get the idea? This is what a list is. And you get a lot of control over what you can and can't see, what you want to filter, all that kind of good stuff. So that's what a list is. Finally, there's groups. Groups are kind of the way that the word says. It's a collection of users that have permission to do something inside of SharePoint. Now, here's the part where it gets a little murky for people. Groups really don't technically live inside of SharePoint. Groups are actually a part of Microsoft 365. If you're using 365 on your own or you're using it with your customers, you'll see that when you have the ability to create groups of individuals. For example, at Decision Digital, we have a group that's called Business Development. We have a group that's called Management Team. We have a group that's called Network Services, right? So we create these groups inside of 365. When you create these groups inside of 365, it will automatically do some things behind the scenes, which are kind of cool. Well, number one, some of you already know that those groups can be seen inside of Teams, right? If you were to look in my Teams, you would see that I have groups that are out there for all different things. One of the other things that happens, which is really cool, and if you haven't tried this at home, you should. Today, go into Microsoft Teams, create a new group or a team inside of Microsoft Teams. And if you look very, very carefully at the team, you're going to see that in the top right-hand corner of that particular group, you're going to see something that looks like 3 dots. Let me show you what it looks like in mine. So here, you can see that I have a group that's called business development. And if you look in the top right-hand corner, let's click on that. If you look in the top right-hand corner, you're going to see that there are these 3 dots. What happens behind the scenes is that SharePoint automatically creates a site that's associated with that group. Check it out. If I click there, it takes me right to the site that was already pre-created for that group inside of Teams. You don't have to do anything. It did it all by itself, right? So keep that thought in your mind for just a second, but just know that groups are groups of people. That's all they are. If I come in here and look at the group, I can see, I can just go to manage team. I can move this over. I can come in here. I can go manage team. See all these people here? This is a group. And that group is the business development group. And it's seen throughout 365. It's in SharePoint. It even shows up, if you paid attention in the Outlook web session, it shows up in Outlook web as a group. Microsoft is pretty clever here because what they did is they realized, if I create this team, wouldn't it be great if I just automatically created a site to go along with it and people could start parking information in there? And they did. And here it is. I didn't create this, it created itself. This is kind of the magic of SharePoint. Keep that in the back of your mind for just a second. That's what groups are. You'll use groups in order to assign permissions to people to access different things in SharePoint. And those groups can be made up of either internal people or external people, depending on how you have your permissions set up. Does that make sense? If I wanted to have a group, I could have a group for working on a project that was me and Frank and say Cheryl. Cheryl being the customer, Frank and I being the people inside of Decision Digital. I could give Cheryl access to that information. Cheryl could be working on it, collaborating on it. Whenever a change is made to that particular folder, Cheryl can get an email alert that lets her know that Frank or I have updated things. So she knows, she doesn't have to call me or send me an email and say, hey, Rick, when are you updating the project? She just gets notified. She just knows because SharePoint takes care of that for her. One less email that I have to send to Cheryl, one less phone call that I have to make to Paul, one less thing that she has to hit me in the head with a hammer to remind me about, right? Because it's just going to happen automatically. So that's the way the groups work. So let's talk, I promise you we were going to talk a little bit more about the types of sites, right? Here's how you understand how the sites are made up inside of SharePoint. Pretty easy to understand. It took me a little while to come up with this, so I'm sure you are laughing because it really does a good job of explaining how it works. I feel sorry for Ricky because he doesn't understand this particular reference down here, but the rest of you Ferris Bueller fans definitely know what that is. So here's the story. A team site is a site where you have your people working together in a highly collaborative means, right? When you create a site inside of SharePoint, the wizard's going to ask you, hey, what flavor do you want this site to be? And you get to choose team site or communication site. A team site is exactly what I said. It's where the sausage is made. Think of a team site as the place where your group collectively gathers and you're working on things together, right? You're pulling together a statement of work. You're pulling together a spreadsheet. You're doing the things that you would normally do to get things ready to be presented to somebody. In our world at Decision Digital, we have a team site for network services. And inside that team site is all the different projects that we're working on at any given moment. Policies and procedures as they relate to the different things in network services that we do. It's a collection of all those kinds of things that are going on pretty much in real time. Here's what I mean. You can see here's my network services group inside of Teams, right? And if I go to the SharePoint site that's associated with it, it takes me out here and you can see here's the network services site. Here's the document library checklist, colo maintenance, on-call procedures, project management. You get the idea? This is where the network services guys live. All the things that they're doing, all is inside of here, right? It even keeps an activity list of all the things that have been worked on by the group. So the nice thing is that daily life for those guys, if they need something, they're going in here because this is their sandbox. This is where they do everything that it is that they're going to do. That's the link with the team site. Again, that's as the thing says, where the sausage is made. This is where we're making things, cooking things, working on things, doing things, right? It's for high collaboration, many editors, lots of people are going to be putting things in and out, right? I'm working on it, Frank's working on it, Steve's working on it, Jason's working on it. There are a lot of things that are going on simultaneously. We also have a team site for business development. Everything that we're doing with business development is landing in the business development site. What do I mean? Just exactly what it is. I kind of showed this to you a minute ago. I can come here to the business development site and you can see all the things that are related to business development, right? Here are all the things that the biz dev team is working on at any time, right? Quotes, presentations, information about Catapult. You can also see that across the top, we've got calendar reminders for everybody in business development about when our next webinars are going to be. This is all information that's relevant to business development. So I think all of you are starting to get kind of the idea of the way that we've got SharePoint set up. It's kind of set up as being departmental, right? You kind of have this layer of departments that are here. And then over the top of it, you have a general site. Versus the way that your mind starts to take you right now. Your mind wants to take you to a place of, well, wait a minute. All I really want to do is I just want to take my file folder structure and I just want to replicate that inside of SharePoint, right? That'll be easy. I'm going to tell you that that's the wrong way to do it. You can do it, but you're not going to really avail yourself of all the greatness that is SharePoint. I want you to think about doing it as a team site for departments, network services in my case, or in many of your cases, there can be an accounting site, an HR site, a technical site. You all know the way that your businesses are structured. And I know that I can see everybody's wheels are turning right now as I start telling you about what the difference is between these two sites. You're starting to kind of get the way that this is supposed to work. So you have a team site for each of these different groups. And then you have something called a communication site. Communication site, well, as the saying goes, this is where the sausage is sold. This is the information that's outward facing. Let me give you a great example. The business development people are working on a new sales strategy for a new product that you're going to introduce to your customers. It gets cooked on the team site with all the business development people. Once it's done, it can be parked in the communication site so that everybody has access to seeing it. Make sense? It's kind of a transition. You work on it, you cook it in the kitchen, which is the team site, right? That's the back of the restaurant. The front of the restaurant is the communication site. Nobody sees the food being cooked in the restaurant. It's just brought out on nice plates and it's put on your table. They put the napkin in your lap. I mean, I know I'm taking you back to a time before COVID when we actually used to be able to go into restaurants and have this food served to us in this way. You can just take a moment and think back of how wonderful that used to be. But this is the idea. The communication site is really for stuff that you've already vetted and completed. You have very few editors because once it's there, it should be done. And it is appealing to a wide audience. You've done your HR policies, you've finished them, you move them from the HR side into the communication site so that the entire company can see them, right? Does that make sense? Does the model make sense, people? Not if you understand, and if you're not doing this, do this so that I know if it doesn't make sense. And for those of you who are not sharing your cameras, shame on you because you're missing out on all the fun. So this is the way that those two sites work. There's only two types. These are the two types. So how do you start to think about setting up SharePoint, knowing that there are two sites? You now know about what it can do. You know about the different sites that are available, and you know about groups. So how do you kind of pull it all together and start designing the way that this is going to look for people? Well, a couple of ways you can do it. One, you can do it this way, right? This way. Does this look familiar? This is your file server. This is your file server that has grown and been augmented and changed year by year by year. Things are nested, buried, duplicated, triplicated, if that's even a word. I'm not sure triplicated is a word, but you get the idea. Does this structure look vaguely familiar to anybody? Sure it does. When we all started using file servers 20, 25 years ago, it made sense to try to replicate the experience that we had with old file cabinets. Now, for the sake of Ricky, he may not know what an old file cabinet actually looked like. But there were these drawers that we used to pull out that had file folders inside of them, and then pieces of paper stuck inside of them, right? And there were these large metal or wood things that would take up an extraordinary amount of space in our office, and we hated them. We hated them. In fact, people hated them so much that they would just stack papers on top of them and just never get around to filing stuff. Thankfully, the file server changed all of that. But this is the way that we built them. And they've just been pretty much staying this way for years and years and years, is the way that it's been, right? It's frustrating because, again, if you don't know the lingo or where things live, you really can't find them. And the search and the index feature inside of Windows is a little bit slow. So if you like this, if you're comfortable with doing it this way, you can continue to ride in that car, and you're not going to really see anything new. And if you choose to do that, I'm sure you probably still have a flip phone that you really enjoy using. When you want to drive on vacation, you probably have a paper map. So you can stick with all those things if you'd like, and you can just drop off the call now. Or you can embrace the change, right? Here's the change. Here's better. Better is you set up your communication site, and then you have team sites below it. So you kind of see what I've represented here. This is kind of the way that Decision Digital looks, right? You've got your main site, which is kind of in the center. And then you have these team sites that are hanging off of it. And under those team sites, you see that there are libraries, lists, and plans, right? Now you'll notice that I've got these icons here for Teams and OneDrive. I have these here because if you're using SharePoint this way, all of a sudden, all this really cool connectivity starts to take place inside of SharePoint. You will be able to see the SharePoint sites inside of Teams. It integrates directly with OneDrive. All this happens automatically, and I'm going to show you a couple of tricks with that in just a minute. But for the sake of visualizing this, when you set it up this way, you can actually get to these things from many different places. If you can think back to 3 or 4 weeks ago when we talked about Teams, I put forth to everybody on the call, Teams is going to become the hub in your world, right? The center of your universe. Everything's going to be connected. Everything's going to be accessed through Teams. This is the other piece that you needed to see, right? Let me go back. In this one here, when you set these sites up, if you want to invite somebody to the party, an email gets automatically generated from inside of one of these sites. I want to share this with Elissa. I click the button to share it. I type in her email address. I type in a message. Hey, this is for you to come join us. And an email will automatically get sent out to her. And she can open it up and she has access to that SharePoint site. Pretty easy to do. I don't have to send documents to her. I don't have to send anything. In fact, the way that we really work inside of Decision Digital is I usually don't even send an email. By virtue of just talking about it in Teams, it automatically posts a link so that Alyssa doesn't have to be fumbling through emails to try to find which one Rick sent me that told me where that link is. She looks in Teams and clicks, and there it is. It's all integrated together so that you don't have to do anything else. Again, I'm trying to be as efficient as I possibly can. Emails get lost too easily. They end up in spam sometimes, or people just get so many of them that it's just ineffective. That's the reason why I love the notifications that happen through Teams and other methods, because they just come right through. So this is better, right? Your main communication site. Remember, this is the front of the restaurant. And then you've got these other areas that are below it. Now, what does it look like if it's best? Well, it looks something like this. This is the way that we actually have it designed at Decision Digital. We have an internal site here. This looks familiar because it's just like the last side. And we have an external site. We can transfer information here, but there's no direct connection between these two. And there's a really, really important reason why. We don't want to run the risk that anything internally that isn't really ready to be shared with a customer should mistakenly be shared with a customer, right? It's a legitimate fear to have of, oh my God, do we have enough things in place that will keep us from not sharing something with customers? Well, if you use this flat style site like I had back here, you can build this out, and you can actually, in any one of these, if you chose to, you could share that with one of your external customers. But you run the risk of something potentially being shared with somebody that you don't necessarily want to be shared. Or worse, you give somebody access to a folder by accident that they're not supposed to have access to, right? In this type of a design, when you have everything living under one roof, you have to spend more time being exceedingly careful about permissions, right? What permissions are in that library that's under business development? Are there any customer permissions in there? You're constantly having to watch that to make sure that you don't make a mistake. You can do it that way. This is more streamlined and it's an easier design, but this invites the opportunity for making a mistake. This is the reason we built ours this way. We have to move things directly into the client-facing sites. And in doing so, we have permissions that are assigned for clients. There isn't an opportunity for me to have any of this information mistakenly being put into here unless somebody physically moves it over. Does that make sense to everybody? So the way that you want to kind of think of this at a high level is when you look at your SharePoint deployment, you basically have two sides. You have your internal side and your external side. You don't want to ever share anything on your internal side with anybody externally, ever, 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 ever. That is your place to play, and it's exclusive to you. If you want it to be shared with somebody in the outside world, you put it in their external site. Yes, it absolutely requires a little bit more work to do, 100%, but it's safer. It also keeps everything where it needs to be. And when you establish the permissions for the group of people that have access to that customer site, you really only have to do it one time. And at that point, you don't really have to pay attention to it any longer because it's already in place and ready to go. So all this is the way that we've got it set up. And let me kind of show you what it looks like kind of in practice. So I already showed you what my internal SharePoint site looked like, and you saw what the team sites look like. But we've also got client sites. And the client sites are listed out. Let's just go here. Here are the client sites. See how they're separated. It's an entirely different URL here. It's in the same general collection, but these are entirely different than the other sites. And what's cool about it is that we have information that's here that is strictly client facing. Give you an example. And those of you who are customers of ours have already been exposed to this, right? So inside of here, we have a master calendar of events. So if any one of our customers goes into one of their subsites, guess what they see? They see these calendar of events showing up in their sites, which I love because we can update it here. And now all of a sudden, whenever they log into their site, they can actually see it. We've created templates so that it makes creating these sites for these customers quick and easy. And most important, it makes them consistent, right? What do I mean by that? Well, let's just take, this is one of our client-facing sites. Notice notice the branding. Notice the look and the feel. We have the opportunity here to share information directly with customers. And those of you who are customers that are in the session, you're already used to this. You already know that this is in play because you use it all the time. But this takes them to our website. This takes them directly to support. This gives them information about getting to their customer portal, right? Here are the documents that have been shared with them for projects, right? Kind of cool. We can just go right here, and here are all the project pieces that we're working on together, and they can click on them, open them, use them. Each one of these sites is exclusive to a customer. So this becomes the place where we park information so that people can get to it all the time. Again, this is a silo that is isolated from everybody else, right? Hence the reason why we have it set up this way. I love that we can do this easily and quickly. Setting up the site takes literally 2 minutes. I can click on new and I can choose site. And then from there, it really just becomes automated. Check it out. I can click on new subsite and it asks me to name it. And from here, I just go to custom and it will pop up my 2 templates that I can choose from. I can choose which template I want to define. I name it whatever I want, and then I can choose the template I want. And once I do, I click create and it creates the site. Pretty easy. And it's there ready to go. And I have a link that I can send to the customer and invite them. It really becomes quick and easy to do. And then you've got something that you can reach out to people. The nice thing is that as you can see, as I look at each one of these, we have a consistent look and feel, don't we? This is all because of that template. So step 1 is you create the template the way you want it to look. and then you save it as a template. And then from there, whenever you want to create a site, you click new subsite and off you go. And if I make changes to those dates, they appear here. It's kind of cool the way that it works. This is the reason why I have this split design. I can keep the customers isolated in their own area and feel safe about it, not have to be overly concerned. And I keep our internal stuff to our internal team. That's why you see the design the way that it is. Now, power tips. The first thing that people usually come up to me and tell me about SharePoint that they do not like is they say, well, you know, Rick, I know, I listen to everything you said about this. I drank all the Kool-Aid. But you know what? You talk about using this thing as a file server, but it's not a file server. You make me, I love the way they say that. You make me go through the web in order to get to all my files, and I hate that. The web is slow. The browser always has issue. Has anybody heard this before? Has anybody used that as an excuse before? It's okay. This is a safe place. Just raise your hand. It's all good. So you're not right. I'm sorry to say. You're missing out on one of the most powerful features that's inside of SharePoint. Let me show it to you. Check it out. I'm going to bring this folder over into view. Can everybody see this on my screen? See this little structure of folders? So these will look familiar. Here's OneDrive, personal, OneDrive for the company. Anybody seen this little icon in their little group before? I got one hand raised. Guess what this is? These are SharePoint folders that have been synchronized to my local desktop. All right, so today I'm working in my home. I'm not at the Decision Digital Worldwide Galactic headquarters, right? I'm on my home machine. These are folders that are synchronized directly from SharePoint. Here's the cool thing. Let's go in here to this folder, and I'm going to go and I'm going to grab, let's see, I'm just going to grab this off of my desktop. Something pretty easy. Let's find some. Here we go. I'm just going to take this little folder. I'm going to minimize this for just a minute in order to make room for this. If I want to come in, I'm getting too many windows going here at the same time. Let's copy. I'm going to paste a document into this folder. Okay? Just grabbed a document off my desktop. Nothing that you wouldn't normally do every single day. And everybody's noticing I'm putting it inside of Windows Explorer, right? All right, no fancy feet there. At least you don't think there is. Watch this. If I come back here, let's go into this particular site. Notice I'm going through the browser. Look there. Everybody see what I just did? I copied a document from my desktop into a folder and it automatically uploaded to SharePoint. Pretty cool, huh? Most people don't know you can do that. Most people think I would have had to have gone and dragged and dropped this file inside of SharePoint and it would have landed here, and that I have to go through that whole painstaking process to make that happen. You don't. If you want to, for your customers that are in transition, you know, the ones that you want to introduce to SharePoint for all the greatness that it has, but they're just not able to get over the hump of using the web page. How can you make that simulate a file server to the best of its ability? All you have to do, literally, all you have to do is go to any one of your sites that are out here. Let's just pick, I don't know. Let's just pick one here. I can pick a folder. Let's go in this way. See this folder here? See this button up here that says sync? If I click on sync, a box pops up and I get an alert on my computer that that folder just synchronized over to my machine. And there it is. So if you think about the classic file server model, what you could do is you could set up a document library that's got all the files and folders, you know, clients, projects, vendors, all that stuff, right? You could set that up and you could tell it to synchronize with somebody. And from that point onward, it's going to synchronize everything for that folder. So if people are accustomed to having that file folder set up that they're really comfortable with, turn the sync on. And I promise you, it's that easy. It literally took no time, as you saw. And look at and these folders automatically synchronize. Whenever I want to save anything to one of these folders, I just open it up and drop it in, and it lands right inside of here. It's a huge misnomer that people have. They just don't think that you have the ability to do that all day long in stereo. It just creates this building icon, and then all the folders just start to appear below it. How cool is that? Yeah. How about a golf clap? I mean, that's worth the price of admission today, right? Most definitely. So that's something that you should absolutely leverage with your customers, is the syncing. Huge, 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 right? Naming conventions. Naming conventions are nice because SharePoint, when you name things properly, it enables the search engines to actually run faster. Finding things inside when you use a common naming convention becomes really, really easy to do. I love the fact that finding things becomes super quick. I type in a name and it starts to look instantly. That's how quick it runs. If I was waiting on Windows, I'd be waiting on Windows, right? I would go get coffee and come back and the search would still be running. You saw how quickly that ran by just typing in a keyword, and it pulled everything out of our SharePoint that related, in this case, to Catapult. Super, super fast. Stick to good naming conventions. Don't use names that are abstract. FY 2020 for fiscal year 2020. Stop doing that. Put in fiscal year 2020 so that you can actually search. So mere mortals can search for things versus people who just don't know what some of these acronyms are. External sharing, pretty easy to do. If I want to share, the site with somebody, I can just send them an invitation. Inside of the site, if I go out to my client sites, I can go at any time, I can go into one of the sites and I can see who it's shared with. If I go into this site, on the right-hand side, if you wait just a second, you'll see that something will come up here on the right-hand side, a little gear, this gives me information about the site. It also gives me information about who has permission to see it. I can drill down here and I can see all the people who have access to the site really quickly. And if I want to invite somebody, it's easy. I click on Share Site and I type in their name. And it pulls directly from my list and it gives me the ability to just send an invitation to them. Look. Hi, Lissa. Let's not do that. Let's do this. That was funny. Here is your invite. Right? And I choose add, and away it goes. She'll get this lovely email that says, welcome to the SharePoint site. It'll give her a link that she can click on that will take her right in. That's how hard it is to share the site with somebody externally. Pretty easy to do. And look, once I do that, I can actually see in here who actually has control over it. So if there's ever any doubt about who has and doesn't have access, I can just look right here and I can see it pretty quickly inside of SharePoint without digging through all different places. Drag and drop. If you don't already know it, inside of SharePoint, all your files can be uploaded. If you choose to use this method, you can just drag and drop your files right into the document library. You don't have to choose upload. You can literally drag and drop them and they drop right in and they upload through the magic of SharePoint. That's another misnomer that people think that every time they need to upload a file, they have to click the upload button. You don't have to. It may not work right now because of the shared presentation. See, that's all you have to do. And if I was to let it go right now, it's going to pop up with a box that says it already exists. Tell it to replace. It works. A lot of people like to use a web interface, but they just don't know that they can upload a file that way. Not at all. You can also create new files from right here. You want to create a new Excel workbook, you can do it from here. And if you create it here, it'll synchronize back to your desk if you want to work on it on the larger client. Kind of cool. Adding Planner. I love this. Now that Microsoft has introduced Planner, inside of your SharePoint sites, you can actually create plans. New plan, you can name it test plan. And guess what? You create the plan, it launches Microsoft Planner. And when you do so, if you stack this out for things to do, about customer things, I can do this and I can assign it to somebody. so that they automatically get alerted. And the nice thing is because this plan exists inside of this site, the customer has access to it as well. So this is nice for lightweight plans with your customers when you want to be able to share with them, this is a project that you're working on. You've got a statement of work that talks about all the stuff that needs to be in, right? But a statement of work just fills that need of, here's everything that we're going to do, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, right? But it doesn't really give you a timeline and it doesn't give you tasks. Here, if you use Planner, you can put these things out there for all the things that you're going to do, all the things that the customers are going to do. A lot of times, especially in the world that we live in, we've started to leverage Planner because we want to be able to show a customer kind of where we are and then divvy up responsibilities between us, right? These are the things that we're working on. These are the things that you're responsible for. We're going to do a whole session on using Planner. I wanted to show you that it completely integrates inside of SharePoint, and it's really that quick and easy. You just click on New and Plan, and you can add it in, and then all of a sudden have a plan that you can invite people to. So that's what Planner does as it relates to SharePoint. And finally, there's Teams integration. I've kind of been alluding to that most of the time during the call today, but of course you already know that if you follow that methodology that I showed you about creating teams that are centric to the departments in your organization, the sites get created along with them, and you keep things kind of in their lanes, and you can easily get to them right inside of here. If I want to get to the site, I've actually got a link up here at the top that I've put, but I can just click here, inside of here, I can just click on the 3 dots, and it will give me the option of going straight to the SharePoint site, which is super cool. It's all integrated. I don't have to tell people where to go, what to do anytime. It all is right here where it needs to be, which I love because it's just less clicking, right? It's all right here. That's all kind of how it flows together. So that's how all these pieces kind of are connected. And that's kind of how SharePoint operates and really the optimal way to set it up. And I know that now that I've kind of shown you all the way that all of that works, some of you have got SharePoint sites in place right now that you're probably saying to yourself, well, hell, now I'm just going to go out there and redo it, because I really like the way that Rick is showing me to structure this. A lot of people that we run into on the Decision Digital side, they set their SharePoint sites up to mimic what they had in their file server. And I will absolutely share with you that the complaints that we get from people, Frank can attest to this, is they say, well, SharePoint just doesn't work, or SharePoint takes too much to marshal, or we can't really seem to find the things that we're looking for. We get these common kind of complaints, or you're making me work inside of a web interface, and I hate that. I absolutely hate that. The answer is no. It does work really well. Most people just went and set it up to try to mimic what they had. And I'm going to make a joke, right? I'm going to absolutely make a joke. You're trying to mirror something inside of a brand new piece of technology that most of you created 15 or 20 years ago, right? So it will be no different than taking a 20-year-old car and trying to retrofit it with a brand new GPS system. Not putting something like a Garmin on the windshield. I'm talking about cutting a hole in your dashboard, shoving an iPad in there and trying to use it as a GPS system. Will it work? Yes. Is it going to be good? No, not at all. That was the reason I wanted to spend a lot of time talking about the team and the communication side, but also thinking about making this department-centric versus file folder-centric. When you start to think about it that way, it's a more sensible, logical approach. Remember, this is where the sausage is made and this is where the sausage is sold. Think about it that way. It sounds like it's more work. It's actually not. It actually works better, it's safer, and it's cleaner. That's the way that SharePoint really wants to operate. All right, with that, I will open up the floor to questions. I'm sure nobody has any because I've answered everything, right? So I see one question that's out here about how far does version control go back? You can actually set it to whatever level you wish, Cheryl. Most people I see will set it to go back 30 days. Some people have it set just to go back. You can either set it up by days or by number of versions. So you may want to set it up to keep 10 versions, or you can set it up for a number of days, either one. I think most people just do it by number of versions. They get, I see that number is usually somewhere between 3 and 5, right? Is what that is. So you have the control to be able to figure out which way you want to go with that. Questions?
Yeah,
I'm going to
Rich.
follow up Seth Madsen. He has a question.
Oh yeah. I'm trying to remember what I wrote to you. Oh right, the table. So the lists. I was kind of curious if that's something that you could create a pivot table out of, or is that something you would need to create already and then upload from Excel?
That's a good question. So you can create something in Excel, and it's got native support to actually import it directly from Excel to bring that information in. They're actually, the lists are more, Seth, think of the list more as kind of flat static information, right? It's taking what's already done and then it's going to bring it in and present it. Now, I feel pretty comfortable. What you're talking about is there's another feature which I really didn't talk about that is built into SharePoint, which is called Excel services. And the way you can kind of think of Excel services is, for everybody to kind of understand, Excel services gives you the ability to display an Excel spreadsheet natively inside of SharePoint, and then have a lot of the functions, macro, pivot table, all those other things executing in that thing in real time. So you create an Excel spreadsheet, you publish it under Excel services, and all that kind of cool stuff that Excel can do, it will do that. Drop downs work, pivot tables work. It'll even pull in external data from a database behind the scenes and display it that way. For what you're talking about, I would think that the Excel services would be the better way to go. The lists are going to be more suited for stuff you've already baked and then want to share where it's not going to be dynamically changing. Now, with that said, with the list, if you really want to, you can enable the ability for people to filter that list, right? And have pre-designed filters. So for example, if I go back to the extension kind of model that I talked about, if you have a list of all the extensions of everybody in your company and you've got 300 people in your company, here's that long list. Well, nobody wants to look at 300 extensions, but you may want to have it filter by department, like here's HR, here's accounting, and they can click on the button, either sort it in that order or filter to only show the people in that department. Does that make sense?
That's good.
Yeah, Excel services is what I would look at. It's super, super cool what it does, for sure.
Thank you.
All right, you're very welcome. I have got a question here from Ricky Lavender. Are you going to send the recording to us today? My CIO wants a copy of this meeting or I'll be fired.
That's funny.
I think I know your CIO. The answer is yes, we'll be sending out a copy of the recording so that, and we'll send a permission slip to that kind of looks like the doctor's thing so that he knows that you actually attended, just so that you're aware. So yeah, we'll be sending out a recording. We're also going to send out a copy of the deck. We've got a couple of other deliverables that we've parked in that folder too that I think you'll also find useful. Kyle, external logins. When we were testing this external login account use, we had difficulty logging in since they were getting confused with their M365 accounts. Yes, that is a common thing that happens. So what you have to do, if they've got a 365 account that already exists, that should allow them to have permission to log into your SharePoint site. But remember, a couple of things happen. One is most people, when they're logging into 365, they tell their browser to cache that information. A lot of times what you have to do, either you have to flush the cache or you have to tell your browser to connect your customer, to tell them to connect to your SharePoint site being in incognito mode in their browser. That way, anything that's cached doesn't come up with an automatic username and password and they click in. Most of the time, that solves the problem. Sometimes people have to flush out their cache, but what Microsoft has been continuing to work on is behind the scenes. If you've got a Microsoft 365 account, when you log into that account, it will know what other sites you have permission to and allow you to pass to those particular sites. It's kind of a little bit of a moving target with them right now, If you're still having trouble with that and need some assistance, let us know. We've troubleshot this a number of times with a lot of people, and we can give you some insight on how to fix the problem so that it works. All right, Wilhelm has got a question about sync. Fire away.
Yeah, so while you were talking, tried to sync my entire IT SharePoint library, and it was trying to pull over all the files to my drive. Is there a way to sync without it, OneDriving it and copying everything to my desktop also?
What it should be doing if you've got OneDrive set up properly is it should be, the way that it defaults is it's actually going to usually just put a marker. Basically, it's going to create the file folder structure. It's going to look and act like it's living on your machine. But the reality of it is it's just basically a marker that's a view to show you what those are. There's a setting inside of OneDrive where you can tell it, just pull in the view or download all the files and make them available offline. That's the setting that you have to go in and check.
Okay.
If you tell it to make them available offline, it's going to download a physical copy and chew up your local drives. If you just tell it to work in normal mode, it's going to show you the file folder list. And then when you click on the file, at that point, it's going to, in real time on demand, download a copy of the file to your machine. If you right click on top of those folders, you're going to see in the folder tree that you're going to have a choice inside of Windows Explorer. If you right click on the folder, it'll have something that says either always make available online or leave offline is what the choice is that it'll give you. And if you don't see that, then you need to go into your OneDrive settings and it will help you figure that out.
Okay. Yeah, that's what it looked like it was doing, that I have it turned on to be available offline, which is no good.
Yeah, which, a lot of times that'll just, the synchronization system inside of OneDrive is remarkably efficient. So I would suggest to everybody, don't synchronize all those files to your local machine. Allow it just to build the folder structure so you can see it. And when you click on it, it just takes a matter of a second or two for it to drop a copy onto you, and everything is right with the world. All right, Norm Chambers, offline work. If documents get changed by multiple users and then sync happens later, who wins the changes battle, and how do you separate online changes, get reconciled and finalized? Good question. What typically will happen is there's a couple of ways that you can actually regulate this. A lot of times what it's going to do is it's going to look at the timestamps on those things in order to figure out who was working on it in order to synchronize it. I recommend that if you've got a document that is going to undergo heavy amounts of modifications amongst the team, there's a feature that's inside of SharePoint where you can do something called checking out the file. And if you check out a file, like Norm, if you and I were working on something, if you decided you want to do heavy lifting on that document, you would check it out and make it kind of unavailable to me for temporarily, right?
It's basically read only for a bit.
Yes, that's exactly right. You can make your changes, they upload, I can get a notification that you've made your changes, and then I can go in and make my changes on top of yours.
And if somebody checks it out, I'm sure there's an easy way to check it back in if the person forgets.
Absolutely is. And it will remind you if somebody clicks on it, it'll tell you it's checked out. And when you're finished working on that document, whatever system you're in, whether it's Word or Excel, will remind you to check it back in. If there are multiple pieces that are coming in at the same time, it will also have the intelligence of asking you if you want to overwrite things or if you wish to merge the changes together. So it has that second layer of protection when multiple people are working as well.
Okay.
That's a really good question.
You see the OneDrive question?
Say again?
You see the OneDrive question, is OneDrive required for SharePoint sync?
Yes, it is, but it's built in, right? It's free. It's built in. If you're got 365, you get OneDrive for Business, which gives you, I think, 1 terabyte of storage. It's pretty mammoth. So yeah, OneDrive is part of it, but now that it's built in as part of the operating system, it's no longer an issue. People don't have to go and run around and try to find it. Andre Brown, can multiple SharePoint installs point to the same database server? Give me a little bit more information on that when you say the same database server. Is he still with us? Yeah, he is.
Yeah, so I'm trying to ask if you can point to multiple install, like a SQL database or stuff in that manner.
Oh, so you're talking about having your SharePoint site reaching in and grabbing data from SQL databases? Is that what you're talking about? Mm-hmm. The answer is absolutely, you can. There are kind of the way we were talking about with Seth about Excel services, there are different ways that you can reach and grab information from databases and pull it directly into SharePoint. There's a couple of ways. There is some native support that is there. There are also some power tools that are out there from 365 that enable you to have more of a robust kind of connection. There's a SQL agent, for example, with Power Automate. Power Automate can then feed information directly into SharePoint, for example. SharePoint's got the ability, it doesn't really care where it's getting data from as long as you tell it where to grab it from, number one. And number two, if there's a way to get to the data. Because remember, SharePoint lives in the cloud, right? So you have to have a secure way to be able to reach through the cloud, get into your network to that database in order to grab information, and then send it encrypted back to Microsoft so that the stream doesn't get corrupted or anybody can't look at that information. On the more robust end, they have an agent that can live on your SQL server that will automatically secure communication between your site and Office 365. It's under the Power Automate family. It's a SQL agent. You install it on your SQL server, you point it to the database or the databases you wish to have access, and it takes care of making that secure connection between your customer site or your site and 365. Once that's in place, it becomes part of the dropdown that you can pick as a data source in order to mine data. And you can have one of those, say, at my site, one at your site, one at Greg's site, for example, all running and pointing into that SharePoint instance, and you can pull data from each of those sites and coalesce it together. Piece you're probably going to need is that Power Automate SQL agent to drop into the machine to make sure that connection is secure.
Gotcha.
It's pretty easy to do. As long if you're comfortable enough with SQL, if you go out to the Power Automate section in 365, you'll find it. And it's just you download it, install it, you point it to SQL, and life goes on.
Okay, appreciate that.
You're welcome. I think we got time for one more for clarity. Is OneDrive? We already did the OneDrive one. Anybody else have a question? All right. It was a pleasure to see everyone. Hope you got something out of this. We'll send an email out after the fact to follow up and let you know that these resources are available. If you need any help designing, working through some of the issues, look, we're a phone call and an email away. Please reach out to us. We're glad to share information and help you any way we can. Alyssa will be sending out an email letting you know when the next what the next webinars are going to be. Please feel free to contact. Sorry?
HIPAA compliance was the next comment.
Let's see. I see it now. Is it HIPAA compliant? The answer is yes, it is HIPAA compliant, but HIPAA compliancy inside of SharePoint is a little bit of a moving target. The platform itself is HIPAA compliant as Microsoft's satisfied the rules for HIPAA compliance, but you can quickly make it HIPAA uncompliant through permissions and sharing and other things that will breach the veil of HIPAA compliancy. So the platform is HIPAA compliant, but you have to be exceedingly careful about how you set up permissions and rights for people to access it, because you could put yourself into a non-compliant situation if you're not careful. And this is another reason why it's really important to keep the data kind of siloed. External people, internal people separated, your external people in each one of their own individual sites versus collectively being inside of one site. Then you go along a lot further way to observing HIPAA compliancy. But I can tell you that it would be very, very easy to share something and breach HIPAA compliance with somebody who either is not permitted to see it or information that can be available to somebody to download. So we have to be really careful on the compliance side.
So in other words, there's nothing, of course, there's nothing babysitting protected patient information or anything like that. And so it's not saying, hey, you just release somebody's address or name or phone number or financial status or anything like that. That's a whole different level.
Well, the answer is that there is something that is there. It lives outside of SharePoint. The Office security and compliance, the Office 365 security and compliance system is kind of the overlord that sits on top of everything inside of 365, including SharePoint. And it's got DLP built into it. So if the HIPAA compliancy piece, believe it or not, and this is actually kudos to Microsoft for designing it this way. They basically made that layer, that security layer, sit on top of everything else as a gatekeeper. So, DLP, thank you, Seth. So DLP is for data loss protection and prevention. So if you go into Microsoft 365 and you fish around, you're going to see that there's an area that says 365 security and compliance. That is the system that sits on top of SharePoint. So if you were to put patient information inside of a SharePoint site and then send me a link, and there's information in there that's patient information, credit card information, social security information, any of that kind of stuff, all that information has to pass through the Microsoft Security DLP system before it gets to me. And if it trips any of the wires that you programmed in for DLP, it's going to be stopped at the gate and kept from going on. So natively, out of the gate, the DLP protection and other things are not in SharePoint per se. They sit above it as an overarching kind of strategy for security that includes SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. All that sits under that Office security thing so that you can tighten it up and make sure nothing goes outside the door. It's especially important because all these things are connected together now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would look, and if any of you are deploying 365 at this point, I would pay very close attention to that system. The security and compliance section inside of 365 is something you should pay heavy attention to. There are a lot of controls in place that are in there that are turned off by default. It gives you an enormous amount of control. It is not hard to do. You should investigate turning it up and making it tight so that it blocks things from walking out the door that you can or that you do or don't suspect are happening. All right, wonderful. That was a great last question. Thank you, everybody. Please stay safe and in good health. Be on the lookout for our follow-up, and we'll see you again really soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. That was a great session.
Thank you.